Hello and welcome to Rushing the Field, a weekly national college football podcast from NBC Sports. He's Joshua Perry. I'm Nicole Auerbach, and we are here to break down Week 13. We are somehow there. Joshua's a little sleep deprived with the baby not giving him a full night's rest. I'm a little sleep deprived because, I don't know, it's just this point in the year. Don't know what day of the week it is. Do know that I'm going to get angry over CFP rankings, and I do know that we have some monster games this weekend, which is pretty exciting because I don't know, Joshua, if back in August, if we had said that, hey, game involving Indiana, Army, and Arizona State would be among the three biggest games of the season in November.
I mean, it's kind of crazy that we're here, but I'm actually really glad we're here. We talked about the impact of the different changes in college athletics in general, but particularly this sport and how it would play out on the field. I do think that there's more of a balance now. Teams aren't able to hoard talent the way that they used to be able to hoard talent, and it's spread out. And guess what? You also got a bunch of really good coaches that have put in the time and that have found out great ways to coach their teams. So here we are, and I love every part of it.
Yes, and we'll get into some of them, particularly the guy who's turning things around at Arizona State in just a few minutes. But we're going to start with the ticket stub, as we always do. It's our entry point to the pod. This is one of my favorite bits of news to ever drop on a Tuesday. Oregon clinched the Big Ten championship game, technically on Saturday night when they won their game. But the Big Ten, because it now has 18 teams, all of these mega conferences have like pages and pages and pages of tiebreaker procedures. It took until Tuesday for the league to announce that the Ducks were locked in for Indianapolis. So they are for sure playing for a Big Ten title. And Joshua, I think they're also a lock for the CFP at this point. If they lose that game, they're still going to be in. They're the number one overall seed right now.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Like clinching a Big Ten title berth on a Tuesday of your bye week is just something very unique. Never really seen it before. I was chatting with some people about this. I think the conferences are really nervous about putting out certain information regarding tiebreakers, regarding ways that teams can clinch, because they want to make sure they're getting it right. And it's so confusing and so convoluted. There's so many things to go through. So I get it, but it is hilarious there. But congratulations to Oregon. I agree with you. They could lose by 100 points in a Big Ten championship game, and I think they're in. Yeah,
they're totally fine. Something that I'm going to track at least as we get to these championship games are how many are won by new members of their conference. Oregon certainly has a very good chance to do that. We'll figure out who they play soon enough. There's a big game in Columbus that will have a say in that. One other championship matchup is set that's of note, particularly because we're going to get into Army a little bit later. But Army and Tulane are going to meet in the American Conference championship game. And here's a fun wrinkle because, of course, none of this is super straightforward. They don't know where the game is going to be played yet because this is a conference that has the championship game on campus. And it's going to come down to, so I was at West Point earlier today as we're recording this on Wednesday. So I was trying to ask them about this. They think it's next Tuesday's rankings. And then assuming that both of those teams win, whichever team is ranked higher then gets to host. So right now, Army is ranked one spot ahead of Tulane. So if they stay even just one spot ahead of them, they will host. West Point will host the American Championship game. But like this stuff is crazy. Everyone got rid of divisions, and it's like we got to get the calculators out. There's a lot of amateur ducks that were trying to do all the math, and we're convinced that Oregon had clinched it on Saturday, but it took until Tuesday of their bye week to get there. So congrats to the Ducks. Congrats to anyone who's clinching in this era of these crazy conferences. We salute you. It's been a mess. It's going to continue to be a mess. Okay, so Joshua, we have been following this as news has trickled out over the last few weeks. Florida is bringing back Billy Napier. So some of these coaches that started the season on the hot seat are retaining their jobs, and they're going to have them heading into next season. We got a couple more pieces of information. Baylor is keeping Dave Aranda. Now, that was an administration that didn't want an excuse to fire him, and they got enough, right? You saw the team was playing hard for him. They won critical games. They're able to say, hey, Dave Aranda will be back. Mack Brown came on my SiriusXM radio show earlier this week. I asked him, people are always wondering, you ready to hang it up? Or how do you feel about, just the amount of work that goes into this, wanting to do this in this era of college football? He said, I'm not done yet. There will be a time where I believe other people can do this better. I'm not there yet. So Mack is back as well. He also opened up about a really tough season, obviously having the death of a player and going through all of that. He said it was a season that reminded him how he feels called to be a coach and how much he felt he was needed for his players, going through something that was so much more than football. So based on that entire conversation, plus his very specific comments, not surprised that he's sticking around as well. And here's the interesting one. There's been a lot of buzz about Deion Sanders and NFL openings. Particularly people like to attach his name to the Cowboys, who certainly are probably going to need a coach. So he got asked about job speculation. I'm going to read this quote, and then I want to get your thoughts on this. Deion said, "I'm happy where I am, man. I've got a kickstand down." You know what a kickstand is? Yes, Deion, we do. That means I'm resting. I'm good. I'm happy. I'm excited. I'm enthusiastic about where I am. I love it here. Truly do. Is Deion Sanders the head coach of Colorado this time next year?
It's a great question. First off, I think it was fair for him to ask if people knew what a kickstand was. I'm not exactly sure that like some of the younger media members ever rode a bike as a kid. So I do think that was a fair question. Yes, me and Nicole know what a kickstand is, but some of these youngsters out here might not.
You think they just went straight to like scooters, or what do you just like?
I think they went straight to they went straight to video games. They went straight to streaming. Is what they did.
They didn't play outside as kids. Kids these days. No, you're probably
no
right.
bumps, no bruises. Like you don't see kids walking around anymore with casts, right? Like you would go to school, a bunch of kids every year, you got a cast, you sign it. They don't do that anymore. Neither here nor there. I sound like a real old dude right now.
You certainly 75. Do. Mr. Werther's candy over here. Yep.
Shout out Werther's. So Deion, if he is coaching next year, it's certainly going to be at Colorado. I don't think that he wants to make that leap. I believe him. I take him at his word when he says that he's enthusiastic about that job and that he loves being there. That is a community and a fan base that has absolutely embraced him. They allow him to be unapologetically prime, and I don't think that works everywhere. I certainly don't think that works with Jerry Jones and the Cowboys. And so I think that if he is coaching, that's where it's going to be. The interesting part of this equation is Shedeur is going to be gone. Travis is going to be gone. I believe Shiloh is going to be gone, right? And like I think he would want to enjoy following the careers of his quarterback and of his do everything player in the NFL. And it's going to be a little bit more difficult to do that when you've got a coaching job in college football. I think that would be the one thing that would take him away. And this is complete speculation. I don't know Prime. But if he's coaching, it's at Colorado. I really do believe him when he says he loves it there.
I also think that we're seeing this, right? Not a lot of head coaching positions are opening in college. Everyone made a lot of changes in the last few years. There's insane buyouts out there across the country. And also, we say this every week, but it bears repeating. Everyone now at the highest level of college football is going to be paying their players $20 million in rev share starting next year. And that's an annual expense. That is a line item that didn't exist. I'm personally hoping it changes the way that coaching contracts work and how they're set up and structured. But that is factoring in to some of these decisions as well. So if there's no openings in college and then the NFL, we'll see if they would let him have this type of control. See if they're interested in the Deion experience. Might not happen. So it's interesting because I think we started the season being like, there's no way he's still going to be coaching this team once Travis and Shedeur leave. And now we're kind of like, if he coaches, if he doesn't just retire, doesn't just hang it up and hang out wherever Shedeur gets drafted. Yeah, maybe he'll just stay in Boulder, hang out with Peggy, who, by the way, turned 100 and the whole stadium sang to her. Just, it's incredible. It's awesome.
It was one of the greatest moments of the weekend. Like, shout out to everybody involved in that.
Seriously, it really was. It was the opposite of a WTF moment, as we like to show on this pod. We've got a good one, by the way, later in today's episode. Last news item is just more housekeeping. Joshua and I did a reaction pod to the CFP rankings that came out on Tuesday night. A lot of talk about BYU dropping 8 spots, the order of the SEC teams, and what it could mean that Boise State might get a first-round bye. So go back to our feed. You can find it in the episode before this one if you want to go a little bit deeper into the CFP rankings. Let's move into our stock up, stock down segment. We decided we wanted to do a singular coach for both. I'm going to give you the floor to make it for our stock up coach, Kenny Dillingham, Arizona State. They almost control their own destiny. There's like one wrinkle in the weird tie-breaking procedures. But boy, that is one of the most incredible turnarounds in a season that we've had some miraculous ones.
Yeah, it's I mean, one of the more interesting stories here, and we've talked a lot about some of the turnarounds, right? Prime is involved in that. We're going to get to Kurt Signetti and what he's done with his team. We get to the game previews. One that's really flown under the radar for me is a Kenny Dillingham story in that turnaround. This is a program that was picked by many to be last in their conference. A lot of people thought it was dead. You know, they're coming off of a scandal, right? Tough times. And then they hire a real young dude who's got a connection to the university, but it almost felt like hey, we know you want to be here and not a lot of other people would take this job. So would you do us this favor and we'll see how this goes? And I don't think he ever looked at it like that. I think he looked at it as, I'm going to come here. We're going to play some really great football. I'm going to coach these guys hard. I'm going to love on them and you're going to see the results. That's exactly what we're seeing here. Now, to your point, mostly in control of their destiny, that's huge. And they've got a matchup with BYU, which is like pivotal. And so everything's kind of coming together for them. I look at both of the losses that they had this year, and like you can really explain them very easily to the point of like, this is a good team that could be undefeated at this point right now.
Yeah, and just to underscore the point about Kenny Dillingham taking this job, he gave a really interesting answer about that last week, where he was talking about how for a program coming out of sanctions, usually you hire a guy to get by, right? You're hiring someone for 2 or 3 years to kind of bridge that gap. And he knew that going into this job, that's what that was set up to be. And he is one of these coaches like Dan Lanning, the way I talk about Dan Lanning, of like who you want to run your program right now, to build excitement, to recruit hard, to coach his guys up hard. I mean, this was a coach who, one of the moments he went viral before, the field storm where he got soaked, like pulled into it. And now all of these other quotes as we're getting to know him more and what he's meant to Tempe is him saying that there were open kicker tryouts. Like things were not going well. There was a portion of this season where things were not going well. But now, Sam Levitt, Cam Scatterbo, like they've got dudes. They're really fun to watch. That game against BYU is massive, and it's coming at a time where BYU is coming off their first loss. Feels very gettable, right? We talked about how that loss was a long time coming, and it's just going to have massive stakes in the Big 12. So they deserve a ton of credit for that turnaround that they've had this year, and particularly doing it under the clouds of NCAA sanctions and everything else that he inherited from Herm Edwards. He was hired youngest coach in college football, and he's getting it done. It's pretty cool.
It's been a lot of fun to watch.
It has. Now here's one who it has not been a lot of fun to watch, unless maybe you're a Notre Dame fan.
Yeah, I was going to say, it depends on who you are. Some people are really enjoying this one.
Okay, so if you're a Notre Dame fan, you are absolutely loving what you're seeing in Baton Rouge. But things are not going well for Brian Kelly. It seems to be regressing, right? It looks like the program's gotten worse in each year that he's been there. And the lasting image of their loss to Florida, who, by the way, again, had a coach who was on the hot seat for much of the season, was a player yelling at Brian Kelly and then Brian Kelly yelling at a different player. I don't know which order of the events were, but we had multiple viral images of just, communication on the sideline. So it's not going well, Joshua. Feels like maybe, to use the cliche, losing the locker room, or just, there's definitely some dynamics there with the players. What do you make of Brian Kelly stock down?
I think they kind of lost the plot down there in Baton Rouge. It's tough. And I'll go back to this. We made fun of when they lost to USC and he banged the table and the water bottle jumped up or whatever. Like that looks like an indicator to me. It felt like a very weird thing. And they were able to put together a nice little run in the string where some people were talking about them as the best in the SEC. And then things start to fall apart. And we see like these traditional BK blowups on the sidelines. When you have players that are willing to bark at a coach like that, knowing that it's going to be on national television, you're in a very difficult spot. I think everybody who wanted to say that it wasn't going to work or he wouldn't be a great fit, they're probably taking the victory lap right now. I'm not ready to throw away the whole experience, but there are a lot of things within that program that have to change.
Yeah, and again, they spent big on defensive coordinator. There's been some improvement sometimes, but that's clearly not the only issue there. A lot of turnovers by Garrett Nussmeier, a lot of discombobulated plays. I thought a telling moment was just like totally not being up for an Alabama game at home at night. That was like a no-show, and that was really confusing to me. So there is a lot, and Brian Kelly took this job because he said he believed he could win national championships there. Meanwhile, his former employer, squarely in the playoff picture, they're in position to host games. So yes, the Irish fans are very much enjoying this. We'll see what happens. It's going to be a really interesting offseason. We'll have to see if Bryce Underwood sticks with LSU, how they spend some of their NIL dollars, how they attack recruiting, because they've definitely got to play a lot better. And I do think, one last thought on this, Jaden Daniels is incredible, and we're seeing what he's doing in the NFL as a rookie. There are going to be people who come back and look at that season that he had at LSU and say that they cannot believe that Brian Kelly had a talent like Jaden Daniels and couldn't even get that team to the playoff. And that's on the coach when the defense was that bad and it was so lopsided and he was trying to will that team across the finish line. So not good.
Yeah, no, it's not looking great. And yes, when you get to that point, you start talking about great players and you couldn't get the job done. And we've done that with some other coaches as well. Certainly doesn't feel like things are heading the right direction. All right, let's get to a little WTF here on RTF. And you and I lament this certainly. And I'm a guy who actually has a November anniversary, but it was COVID, and I can explain it away pretty easily. The idea of a wedding on a college football Saturday. But if you're going to do it, you should do it like this. Get the projector out, project it onto that beautiful white wedding dress. And look, it was our game from the weekend, Oregon, Wisconsin.
It was. Well, hey, listen, like the number one team in the country was about to go down. So you need to check in on that. I've not seen this. I have seen people who pull up their phones and they put them, on the back of the seat in front of them so that they can watch during a reception or during a ceremony or a reception. I have never seen the projector onto the white dress, but listen, like that's what white dresses are for. They could make great projectors. That's honestly the quickest way to do it. And it looks like it was kind of early in the game, though, I will say. It looks like Oregon was up 3-0. So I'm guessing that they had to pull the projector back out for later in the game. That got dicey. This is creative, though. I will say, though, the thing that you just said, you can excuse away getting married in November, but now your anniversary is always in football season. That's the tough part.
We have very clear communication, great setup. My wife is very understanding that sometimes I'm going to be on the road. It was last week. I was on the road. We were at dinner on Friday. And, we just come back to town and we do the anniversary thing when we can do it. I got to ask the question, though. You're getting ready to get married. You're in the throes of wedding planning. Will you have a projector?
No.
So we can put images on your dress?
Absolutely not. Not that kind of wedding. Again, no disrespect to this lovely lady. She looks like she's loving it. I will also say that I'm getting married in May. So I'm definitely not projecting like a regular season Major League Baseball game onto my dress on my special day. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Maybe playoff NBA. No, not doing any of that. But I do respect this. I hope that they went to Oregon or Wisconsin. That's my hope, because if you're doing this for a team that you're not associated with, that's a different level of sicko than you and I.
I hope it was somebody who would have been peripherally affected by the outcome of this game.
Beyond gambling? Or
no, I'm saying like their team would be invested in this outcome, but it's not either one of the teams playing in the game.
That would be pretty funny. But yes, congrats to those who combine fall weddings with watching their college football. This is a creative way that we did not even know was possible to do that. Let's get into our power rankings for the week. Joshua, they are presented by Citi. They are the best 2-loss teams across the country. I let you take a stab at this. So I want you to run through these teams, although a lot of them are in the SEC and fairly self-explanatory. But walk us through how you see these 2-loss teams that are all close enough or within the CFP picture.
I hated this exercise. It's one of the most difficult things. You suggested
it. This was your idea.
Because I'm stupid, but here we are. And now I have to try to explain what I did here. So I think this is a different question of where these teams should be when it comes to the college football playoff rankings, right? Like, I don't think we just get to say that I think this team is better, so I'm going to put them here. That's not what the committee's there to do necessarily. They operate off of different parameters, but this is what I came to. So I put Georgia there at number 1. Now, Georgia has played some awful football at times. So, like, again, you could have this in different combinations, but I look at the wins that they have. They've got 3 top 25 wins, but also their losses are to teams that I think are really good football teams. I think Alabama is a good football team. I think Ole Miss is one of those teams that probably doesn't get looked at the way that they should. I think Ole Miss can legitimately win the title this year the way that they're constructed. And so for Georgia, like, getting blown out by Ole Miss, not a great look. The Alabama game got away from them. They got back into it. It wasn't a great look. But those are teams where I could see that as a reasonable outcome. Then I went to Alabama. Again, I like what they do. Jalen Milroe, phenomenal. Tennessee, I think, is a good football team. You could understand how they could lose in that game. Vanderbilt is the one that's a big question mark, and that's why I had to put them at 2. Now you're talking about a loss to a team that plucky, they like to fight, not a great football team. Take it down to Ole Miss. Kentucky, right? Like, you lose to Kentucky. I got to ask the question. Now we see LSU. That one's a little bit different because they were never down in that game. But losing to LSU, probably not a great look right now. So that's why you got to bump them down. For Tennessee, we watched what happened against Georgia. That is fresh in our mind. They got handled in that game, and Arkansas is not a great loss there. Again, Tennessee, one of those teams that when they're playing good football, you like them. And then the 5th one, I threw this in here more for the conversation of it. But I mentioned Arizona State and how you could explain away their losses there, how this could be an undefeated team in a different universe. One of these losses, their starting quarterback did not play, right? And they are just ascending. I think they're playing good football. And again, with this view that they could be in the college football playoff, I think I need to shout them out.
Okay, so here's my question for you. Peeling back the curtain, we're discussing about different topics that we want to talk about for power rankings. You said, let's do the best 2-loss teams in the country because I think Colorado might be that team.
Yes.
They are not in your top 5.
I know. I started looking at Colorado and some of the resume, and I think that they're a dangerous team. They are very obviously flawed. Like, even with some of the improvements that they've made on defense, even with the talent that they have on offense, the more I started getting into this exercise, the harder it was for me to actually put them in there.
All right. I'm just saying. Just saying.
I mean, keep me accountable. I'm a big accountable. This is not me not believing. Let me be perfectly clear about this. This is not Joshua not believing. Don't start narratives. Because I did it last year. I didn't believe. I'm starting to believe.
Last year was different for sure.
See, Nicole got the shades. She wore them over the weekend. She's got the shades, and so now she's just like she's a buff now.
Yeah, I mean, I've also said that it's Travis Hunter's Heisman to lose. So yeah, I'm all in with them. Listen, I get all of that, and I think that your order of the SEC teams is probably right because of those Ole Miss losses. Like, the Kentucky loss is really, really bad. But I'm with you where, like, I think in my order of teams that I think could win it all, I might have Ole Miss number 1.
Yeah.
Like, so I think that's where, like, power rankings of these types of teams, you're going a little bit more my resume where I think I might go, like, who I trust moving forward. Yep. And I might even have Ole Miss higher there. So I think that is the big question, and that's what so much of this argument about, which poor Indiana has borne the brunt of the 2-loss teams in the SEC, that these schedules are really hard, but there's obviously a lot of talent on the teams, and so it does become difficult to sift through them. I agree that Tennessee would be 4th, though, on my list. I don't think that offense, I don't trust it. And the blowout loss to Georgia when Georgia was finally, kind of firing on all cylinders, that just shows me, again, like, that separation between those other teams in Tennessee.
It's really hard to get rid of that image of what they look like against Georgia. I'm totally there. Yeah. I do want to make this point since you brought Indiana up. None of these teams I'm making any excuses for to have anything over Indiana right now, right? Like, the schedule is the schedule. I get it. This is a deep conference. It's competitive. But, like, I will not shed a tear if one of these teams is on the outside looking in and a 1-loss Indiana's in there. Like, y'all can cry all you want to. I will not join.
You know what? Even if you got a challenging schedule, you still have games on there that if you win them, it's not an issue.
That's the thing. Win the games.
Doesn't end up being a thing. And all the way, also, by the way, again, like, we're looking at a loss to Vanderbilt on here. We're looking at a loss to Arkansas, right. Loss to Kentucky.
Yep.
So for all the talk about the schedule, I mean, Georgia's got the 2 good losses, right? Like Georgia, if that was a team that wasn't playing well for like 6 weeks.
Yep.
These things were defensible.
Yes, and that's where I'm at. Like some of these losses, I can't feel bad for you. Right. I really can't.
Just don't lose to Vanderbilt. Don't lose to Arkansas. Arkansas lost to an Oklahoma State team that is
has not won a conference game. Oh my God! Now you want to know, just to tie this all together real quick. The Georgia quarterback and the Oklahoma State quarterback have thrown the same amount of interceptions this year too, just to throw that in there for people who want to feel bad for Georgia and they're not getting enough respect. Like you should know that as well.
Yeah.
So
why don't we talk about the Hoosiers?
Yeah, let's move on to some of these game previews. Week 13, as you said, my gosh, time has flown. We're going to make picks here against the spread as well. And let's start off with the Hoosiers, the number 5 team in the country. They are making a trip to Columbus, Ohio to take on the Buckeyes. Ohio State favored by 13.5 points. Woof. Okay, so
big line.
It is a big line. A little bit of news here. Ohio State center Seth McLaughlin sustained Achilles injury during practice on Tuesday, is expected to be out the rest of the season. This is a big deal because Ohio State's offensive line has already had to do a lot of shuffling. Josh Simmons, the left tackle, who has been mocked in the first round in some of these mock drafts, he got hurt against Oregon. They've been able to kind of cobble it together. I think the first game back against Nebraska was not good. Since then, they've played much better as a unit, but just you ask the question, how much more they can sustain in terms of injuries on that offensive front.
Yeah, and I mean, it's an Indiana team that will be curious to see if they can take advantage of that, right? Like we've talked a lot about Indiana being very sound on both sides of the ball. Where they had issues against Michigan the first time that they went up against dudes that are going to play on Sundays was Michigan's defensive front and their offensive line. So now we're talking about the reverse of this. It's been an interesting week because I feel like not a lot of people have actually talked about the game and how these teams match up. It's more just been this idea of Indiana being a big underdog and that like Indiana's schedule. Well, the meat of the schedule is here. Like this is the game. This is what's going to define their season. Give me a key. Like how would Indiana either potentially pull off a win or at least keep it close? Because I think we're all in agreement that a close loss keeps them, maybe decently positioned for the CFP.
Yeah, I'm looking at 2 things there for Indiana. The first thing is what they can do to affect Ohio State's offensive front. Indiana leads the Big Ten right now in sacks and tackles for loss. This is a very disruptive front. They do a great job of affecting the quarterback through one-on-one matchups. They also do a great job of using scheme to create havoc on the front. And so I think that is a way that they can find an edge in the game. Where Ohio State has struggled in games, they haven't run the ball particularly well. Second half of that Oregon game against Nebraska, they didn't run it well. So I think that's going to have to be Indiana's job number 1, is to create havoc and use their front that's played well all year long to do so. The flip side, I look at Indiana's offense. We talk about Curtis Rourke as a guy who should have a ticket to New York. He is a very good quarterback, and he throws it to some receivers that are difference makers. And it's not just one guy or 2 guys. They have 6 players on that roster that catch at least 2 balls a game. They've got wide receivers that range from 6'2" to guys that are 5'9", a little bit shifty, but can still play big. And Ohio State secondary, they've got a corner named Denzel Burke, who I think is a great player, who is very inconsistent. The ball can go over his head. It's happened numerous times this season. They got another corner named Davison Igbinosun, who likes to grab a lot. And if you can isolate him one-on-one and just kind of throw the jump ball, you might be able to move the football down the field with penalties. So those would be the 2 keys in the game for Indiana: a disruptive defensive front and the wide receiver quarterback connection against Ohio State secondary.
I think that Indiana can cover because this is a big line.
Yes.
It is also at the shoe. And, Indiana has been spending an entire season hearing about how great Indiana is and what a great story they are. Ryan Day's teams have kind of crushed some of the upstarts in the Big Ten when they're non-traditional powers. But he, again, we've talked about this over the course of this season, has struggled in games against top 5 teams. This is technically a top 5 showdown because Indiana is in that threshold.
Not technically. It is a top 5 showdown.
Okay, it is. I'm just saying there are people who don't believe that Indiana, has actually deserved it. But again, it'll be interesting to see how this one goes. I think Indiana will be prepared. I think they will be sound. I don't think they'll beat themselves. They will be playing so many more talented players than they have in a single game this season. But give me Indiana to cover and keep it close. Keep it interesting because Ohio State starts the game slow. And Indiana believes that they can do this, that they can beat anybody, they can crush any opponent, but certainly that they can hang in this game. So I think Ohio State wins, but I think Indiana covers.
I'm there with you. I love that you brought it up. This is one of the most well-coached teams I've watched all year long. They're not going to do things to hurt themselves. I don't think going on the road is a situation where you have to worry about the environment. Are they going to be locked in? Like, I don't think they care. Curt Cignetti essentially said, we don't care. We're ready for this. And I believe him when he says stuff like that. I think this game is close into the fourth quarter. I'm going to say that Indiana covers as well. Ohio State ends up winning. I do also think this is one of those situations where you might get a backdoor cover where Ryan Day tries to score a touchdown late in the game if they're in range to do so. So the scoreboard looks a little bit better than maybe what the game flow actually said about it. But let's get to this other huge matchup here. We got number 19 Army. They are taking on number 6 Notre Dame. Notre Dame favored by 14.5 in this one. That game is at Yankee Stadium. Very excited about this. This is an Army team that can present a challenge from the standpoint of not only the makeup of their offense with the triple option. Bryson Daly is a big quarterback, and he is a physical guy. He does not shy away from contact. Also, in the situations where they do decide to drop back and throw the ball, been pretty accurate getting it to the wide receivers there. It's a Notre Dame team, as we know. They start the game running the football. They're going to want to end the game running the football. Nicole, how do you see this going?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, I spent the day at West Point. Just an amazing place. Completely recommend getting there, going to a game there. It's like a bucket list item. They're pumped. They are like really ready to go. They had to had a raffle drawing for tickets for the cadets, and like only 300 got to go for free. And wearing their uniforms and everything. But everyone else could get tickets and try to come either way. So they're really amped. They're undefeated. They have an outside shot at the college football playoff, right? Like if they win the American and end up being the highest ranked group of 5 team, they'll be in, which is an incredible story. But also that they'll play the conference championship game, their first year in the American. They still have the big Army-Navy game. Both of those teams got a lot of fanfare this season. So there's so much still to go. And it's interesting because when you're on the post, which is what they call like their campus, everything says beat Navy, like it's everywhere. And then you're like, well, do you want to beat Notre Dame? Like, where does that stack up? It's second. It's not the main thing. The main thing is beating Navy. Like that's something that your legacy is built on, your life is built on, anytime that you're interacting with anyone else from the military. So I think they're going to be ready. But I think that they're also kind of a little bit playing with house money in this situation because, they have played a lot of teams. The schedule conversation has come up with them, right, about not a lot of teams that have winning records. And they've been able to blow people out. And then, they did survive the game when Bryson Daly wasn't there due to an illness. So I think that they're going to be formidable. They will be up for it. This is the second option-based team that Notre Dame has played, and they crushed Navy. Like, we know there were a lot of turnovers, a lot of forced turnovers, but they were up for that game. And this is a program in Notre Dame that always plays an option team every year. So I'm not worried about that. Like, I'm not worried about the preparation. The Irish have played so well over the last, 8 weeks now, that they've really figured out who they are. And they are, with the way that they run the quarterback with Riley Leonard and all the different things that opens up, it's a little Navy-esque, a little Army-esque, right? Like they have that opportunity from someone who also is the quarterback. I'm not that worried. I think Notre Dame will cover the 14.5 points because I think that they are happy to be in the position that they could host a game in the playoff. I think they are a different team now. And they've survived injuries on the defensive side. So I think that they will be victorious. But man, I really like this Army story, this Army team. Jeff Monken's a heck of a coach. And that they have this wrinkle that they can throw the ball more than they used to. They used to call them wide blockers instead of wide receivers. Like this is a different offense, but is still option-based. And I think Notre Dame will be prepared for it, and this defense will be able to handle it. And Riley Leonard and company will have a little bit of a field day on the ground and take care of business.
Yeah, I'm leaning toward an Army cover in this one, but Notre Dame's going to win the game. I don't know how 14.5 is a big number to me.
It is a
so
big number.
I'm not
Notre Dame is crushing.
They are
right now.
No, I'm with you there, but
They're
like I'm not saying
spread.
that it's going to be a super close game, but I could see this being like a 10-point game in the end. It get a little bit mucky. Both the teams running the football, not a lot of time to really pull away because the clock control and all the different factors that come in a game like that. But I think it's going to be exciting. Can't wait to cover that one over the weekend. But let's get to this last one here. So we got Colorado as a 2.5-point favorite. They are going to play Kansas. And this one is real intriguing. Like, people are probably looking at Kansas's record and the way that they played earlier in the year. They're looking at Colorado and the way that they have come onto the scene. They're saying 2.5 points. So is this right? Like a crazy line here? Let's be perfectly clear. This is a Kansas team that's playing some different football right now. Jalen Daniels, he's back healthy. He looks healthy right now. I think they're also like, hey, we could make a bowl game. Like, we could really salvage this season. They're playing much better than they did at the beginning of the year. And as I have mentioned, Colorado is a much better team than what we watched last year. I still think that they have some pretty glaring flaws that can be exploited. The biggest question is, can you knock off the confidence of the Buffs, because they're playing really confident football?
Yeah, I love this game. I think it's so interesting. It's also being played at Arrowhead because Kansas is playing a few games there as they're doing stadium renovations. So that adds like another kind of different element to it. But the Kansas team that we've seen the last 2 weeks that have drastically impacted the Big 12 race because they're knocking teams off that were in the mix for it, that's the Kansas team we thought we were going to see. Like, that's the team that we expect under Lance Leipold. Jalen Daniels was the preseason player of the year in this conference. I mean, it was kind of a pick-em at the start of the season with like 6 different teams you could make a case to win it all, but Kansas was one of them. So I think it's just great that they have rounded into form at the right time, and it's making this such a massive game. This and Arizona State BYU are monster games in the Big 12. Colorado has control of its own destiny. It can play its way into the Big 12 championship game and a potential auto bid to the playoff, which is wild in just year 2 for Deion Sanders. I think that this is going to be a close game, a really interesting one. And I think that it's going to potentially come down to Kansas's offense because we have seen that come alive in the last couple of weeks, but they're still not great at explosive plays. And I think that's where you can take advantage of the Colorado defense the most.
Agreed.
So I think that this ends up favoring, Colorado, quick strikes, Travis Hunter trying to continue to build his case for the Heisman. Like, I really like what Colorado can do, and I just don't know without the explosive ability for Kansas if they'll be able to ultimately do enough that they need to. So I've got Colorado and covering because it is only 2.5 points.
No notes. I agree with everything you just said there. I think that would be the biggest thing Kansas could do, was try to get the football down the field in chunks. Colorado's defense is gettable that way. Is Kansas's offense built to do that? Is the big question here. So I'm rolling with the Buffs. I'm definitely rolling with them.
All right. So let's look at Underdog. That was like a 2.5 point spread against Kansas that's not bowl eligible right now. So it's like I sort of believe.
I believe.
Okay. You believe, we both believe in the Buffs this week. One step closer to the Big 12 championship game. All right, let's give our underdog picks. Again, we are crushing it. We need to actually write all of this down so that people start following us and making money off of these picks, or we need to listen to ourselves and maybe do it that way. We have picked a lot of outright winners, but we've definitely covered a lot of times. I'll go first, Joshua. We talked about both these teams a little bit earlier. Vanderbilt is a 7.5 point underdog at LSU. I think LSU is in a bit of a free fall. I know Vanderbilt also is not they've had trouble getting up for games that are not their biggest games on their schedule. But I think it's easy to get up for a trip at LSU when you're catching LSU, when they are losers of 3 straight and the coach and the players are screaming at each other on the sidelines. I think that's exactly the kind of game that Diego Pavia could just do his thing. So I think they could outright win this game, but I certainly think that Vanderbilt can cover.
Yeah. When you as a player and as a coach, when there's blood in the water, those are the times where you really pounce. And I used the word plucky earlier. Like, I think this is a team that's just going to go in there and say, we're going to do whatever it takes to win, right? Like, we don't care how it looks, and we don't care what people have to say. Like, we're trying to get a win over a team that people probably don't believe that we can beat.
They have played their best against like the biggest names. LSU's still an A.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, you got Alabama, obviously, the win there. The way they played Texas, that game was real sticky there toward the end.
But that was more just like a Hugh Freeze, Diego Pavia, like rivalry thing going on there.
He got that man's number, which is amazing.
He does.
All right. I'm gonna give you a real interesting one here. Penn State going to Minnesota. Minnesota's an 11.5-point dog. I got a feeling about this one. I do. So the more I've looked at Penn State, the more disappointed I have been in them. Their offense is real problematic to me. I don't think they trust Drew Aller very much. They've got two good running backs that can't really rush the football because they're running behind a very average offensive line. Their wide receiver room is abysmal. They are not a good unit. And if it wasn't for Tyler Warren, who people should be considering for the Heisman Trophy at this point, he is phenomenal. If it wasn't for him, I don't know how many wins this team would have. And I think it makes it pretty easy to develop a game plan when you're going up against Penn State. It's get 44 out of the game, right? Like, find a way to make 44's night as hard as possible. Minnesota, on the other hand, I think that they've played very structurally sound defense, and their offense with Brosmer has been a revelation to me. They've thrown the ball pretty efficiently, and I think they're running the ball the way that they want to. PJ Fleck, I think, has probably opened some eyes a little bit this year, too, with some of the people who are not necessarily excited about him. I think they can get a win here.
So I thought about this, not for a win, but for the points, because it does feel like a lot. And I think, Minnesota at different points in the season, like we did a power rankings at one point this year where we thought they were the 5th best team in the Big Ten, which is still like a hard spot to determine.
Yep.
So I like this pick. I think there's a lot of value in this pick, and I think it's one of the ones that's not one of the high profile games from the weekend that could be, we got to get that on the main TV. Like, this is going to get interesting, especially because Penn State and Texas have somehow evaded all sorts of criticism with their schedules. I know you're referring to them as the Texas of the North and the Penn State of the South. Like, they're the same team. So again, like, they do feel like they've got flaws that they could get beat. And this is a very interesting one. And 11.5 points against a really tough Minnesota team on the road. It's an interesting one. I like the pick. I don't think they're going to win, but I think they're going to have a rough day.
Dang, so no confidence that your boy's going to have the big underdog this week. That's fine.
It's 11.5 points. That's like a really big
I do not care.
Pick.
We're going all in. Chips in the middle of the table. Let's rock.
Row the boat. Row the damn boat.
How about it?
Oh, I love it. I love it. All right. Well, that's what we'll leave you with. Hopefully, at least one of our picks earns you some cash this weekend. Somehow it is week 13, which is just unbelievable that we are here. 2 more weeks left of the regular season. We will again have CFP rankings, reaction shows the rest of the way, and we'll be back for a full episode as well for Rushing the Field next week. For Joshua Perry, I'm Nicole Auerbach. Thanks as always for listening. We'll see you next week.